Dear God, I'm ready for your help in removing from me the defects of character which I now realise are an obstacle to my recovery. Help me to continue being honest with myself and guide me towards spiritual and mental health. Amen. It is with much love and gratitude that the group welcomes JW to come and share with us. Jay, it's over to you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Wow. Thank you so much for asking me to come speak, Purdy. My name is Jay Westbrook. I'm an alcoholic in Tupelo, Mississippi. I'm also a recovering cocaine addict. My sobriety date is December 2nd, 1988. I came in through the rooms of Cocaine Anonymous, and these days I are mainly in Alcoholics Anonymous because Cocaine Anonymous doesn't have a lot of morning meetings, and I'm a morning meeting person. So I'm in my first sobriety and so grateful for that. I've had lots and lots of reasons to relapse. I just haven't done it. And if there are people on here who are new, I think it's important for me to say I'm just another alcoholic and addict. I'm not a paid speaker. I'm not speaking for Cocaine Anonymous. I'm not an expert. I'm going to share my experience, strength, hope, and I guess some of my opinion. I may say some things that are a little controversial, but I've been around a few one days at a time, and these are things that I've discovered and believe, and I'm so grateful that on page 164 in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the basic text of Cocaine Anonymous, but on that last page of A Vision for You, the first sentence in the second to last paragraph says, our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. And so I may say some things that are different than what you've heard before. And if it doesn't work for you, toss it out. And if it does, embrace it. And that Herbert Spencer quote at the end of the Appendix 2 is one that I love. And it says that there's a principle, which is a bar against all information, proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a person in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. So we'll see where this goes. And I'm supposed to talk on steps 6 and 7. One of the characteristics of the alcoholic or the addict is defiance. So I'll start by talking about step 9, steps 8 and 9, which when you read the book, it says that the primary purpose of those two steps, 8 and 9, the amends steps, are to better fit ourselves to be of service to God and our fellows. To better fit ourselves to be of service to God and our fellows. So how do we do that? And what does it take to be of service? And if that's the purpose of the 8th and 9th step, I'm a big believer that it takes being present in the moment. I don't know where y'all gamble in the UK, but here obviously it's Las Vegas. It's sort of known for gambling, and all of the casinos have a sign that say you must be present to win. And I think life is kind of like that. You must be present to win. So if I'm looking back there at my childhood and my adolescence and my young adulthood, then I can't be here. I can't be present if I'm back there. So one of the requirements to better fit myself to be of service to God and others is that I be present. And my experience is that the path out of the past back to the present is forgiveness. And we'll talk about that when I actually start talking about 6 and 7. But that's the basis of it, that you must be present to win, and I want to win, and I want to be of service. And so I have to be present to do that. And these two steps, 8 and 9, are the amends steps. And there was a war, I think, back in the 1700s between Britain and the United States, and the U.S. won their independence, and they created the Constitution, which kind of is this revolutionary document, or it was revolutionary at the time, and it let us step away from a monarchy, and they created it, and then they looked at it and said, we can do better. And they created the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Then they called it the Bill of Rights. And those were 10 principles which made the Constitution a better document. They didn't call it the first 10 apologies to the Constitution. They called it the first 10 amendments to change for the better. And it seems to me that if we're going to go out and make amends in 8 and 9, to make an amends, we have to have amended our behavior. Otherwise, we're just making an apology. And I don't know about y'all, but when I got here, nobody wanted to hear an apology from me, because they had heard it and heard it and heard it, and watched it be violated and broken. And, I swore and I promised and I begged and guilt tripped and manipulated, but they were still apologies and I still violated them. And so to be able to prepare myself to make amends, I have to amend my behavior. And that's really what 6 and 7 are about. So I do the work in 6 and 7, and not everybody does that work. So we go back to 4, we do that inventory, a searching and fearless, a fact finding. Searching is fact finding. Fearless is fact facing. A fact finding and fact facing moral inventory of ourselves. And we discover some truths, and then we share it with another person, our sponsor, and God. And that's called step 5. And then what we do for 6 and 7 kind of depends on two things. One is our sponsor's experience and how they guide us, and the second is what our personal beliefs are. So there are a lot of people in our program who have a belief in an intervening God. I'm not one of them. I come from a background, number one, raised atheist, drilled into my head, there is no God, there is no God, don't ever believe in God, God is the opiate that the masses just use to control people, drilled into my head. My parents were hardcore atheists. Separate from that, from age 3 on, I was given away to a family who were monsters, and I'm a survivor of 3 years of being locked in a pitch black closet and being pulled out once a day to be raped by 3 adults and tortured. And so as my life went on, the idea of a God, of any God, was absurd to me. Why would a God ever allow that to happen to a child? And I was also an intellectual hypocrite. So I did not believe in God, but I blamed the God I didn't believe in for every bad thing that ever happened to me. I mean, it just made no sense. Intellectual hypocrite, intellectually lazy. And I prayed to that God that I didn't believe in. And my prayers sort of sounded like this. Please, comma, God, comma, don't let that liquor store close before I get there. Please, comma, God, comma, let the dealer be there and the dope be good. Please, God, don't let those police be pulling me over. But I don't believe in God. But please, God. I mean, it just made absolutely no sense. But I came in here and I was atheist and I lived in Los Angeles at the time, and my sponsor did what the Los Angeles sponsors do, drove me down to the beach and said, okay, stop the waves from rolling in. See, you can't. There's a power greater than yourself. And I had some expletive comment from my sponsor, like, fuck you, that's gravity and the moon and has nothing to do with God. There is no God. And so, that same sponsor threw a set of keys at me one night as we were breaking down the meeting. I wasn't expecting it. And he threw them really hard and really fast, and they hit me in the chest and they fell to the ground. And my sponsor said, you know what? I don't believe in gravity, and walked out of the room. And it gave me pause. It was like, well, wow, he doesn't believe in gravity, but the keys still fell. It was pretty cute. Clever, but it certainly wasn't enough to convince me that there was a God. And after 2 years into my sobriety, I had been working as a cancer nurse and then a pain management nurse in a big hospital, and then I made the leap to hospice. That was it. There was God. The place where life and death meet is filled with God. Period. That wasn't a theory or a hypothesis or a question or a possibility. For me, it was an experiential certainty. And I didn't want to believe in God, but on death call after death call after death call, there was God without any question. And so all I had to do was figure out how I could conceptualize that God given the context of my life experiences, the parents giving me away, the rapes, the being locked in the pitch black closet, the ritualistic torture. Then I ended up in a penitentiary in California and was gang raped multiple times. And it was like, how God is undeniable, but how do I make it work with that story? And long journey, but where I got to is there's a loving God who designed it, created it, put it in motion, and gave us free will. And my God never ever leaves my side, co-journeys with me always, and co-suffers with me, but does not intervene. My God is a non-intervening God. So that could then work with all of my history, that God watched me being raped at 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 years old and wept at my suffering, and looked at my rapists and wept at their suffering, that they'd moved so far from his grace, but did not intervene because there was no need. He made them with everything they needed for redemption, and me with everything I needed for resilience. And I don't know if they reached for it, but I certainly did. And first through alcohol and drugs, and then when that didn't work, through our powerful fellowship and our transformative 12 steps and 12 traditions. So there I was, having finished step 5, and I don't have a God who's going to reach down and pluck my character defects. And I also have a big book that on page 83 in the 9th step promises says, that God is doing for us, we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. So why would God take my character defects? That's not something that I can't do for myself. And God's certainly not going to foster laziness in me. So then we get to another issue for Jay, and here's where Jay gets, I guess, a little controversial. Again and again in the big book, there's talk about resentment being the number one offender, and our resentments and our fears are our biggest defects. And I have a very different view, and that's why I said it in the beginning. I'm so grateful that the book says our book is meant to be suggestive only. So it seems to me that character is defined by behavior and behavior alone. Not our thoughts, not our feelings, and certainly not our intentions. Oh my God, I didn't intend to drive into the crosswalk and hit those children. I was just trying to get home from the bar when nobody cares. The children are still dead. Nobody cares what my intention was. Character is defined by behavior and behavior alone. And if that's true, then character defects are behaviors that are defective, that no longer serve me. They may have been survival skills at one time, but they no longer serve me. Now, that's how I view this, and I think that what is often referred to in the big book as character defects are really feelings. And our feelings, or my feelings, I'll keep it on me, are God-given. I can't summon fear, and I can't dismiss it. I can't summon anger, and I can't dismiss it. I can't summon loneliness, and I can't dismiss it. Those feelings are God-given, and they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when I'm in them, it feels like they will never, ever end. But they do. So if those feelings are God-given, and they often have purpose, fear certainly can have some real positives. It can keep me from going down dark alleys late at night. It gets me off the track when the train is coming, and it keeps me from going into places where I may end up loaded again if I'm reckless and not careful in where I put myself, situations or places. So if character defects are behaviors, then I suddenly realize that because the behaviors are the only thing I can choose. I can't choose the feeling. I can only choose my behavioral response. When I'm feeling terrified, I can't get rid of the terror, but I can choose my behavioral response, which would be either cowardice or courage. And when I'm enraged, feeling enraged, I can choose the behavior of vengeance or the behavior of forgiveness. And when I'm feeling lonely, I can choose the behavior of isolation or the behavior of reaching out and engaging. And so I see the character defects as isolation, vengeance, and cowardice, rather than loneliness, anger, and fear. Does that make sense? I hope it does. If not, there's not much point in my having said all this. I hope it does. It makes sense to me. So what I deal with are my behaviors. And if God is not going to do for me what I can do for myself, then it becomes incumbent on me to do the work of 6 and 7. And if you're somebody who has an intervening God, then I think you don't need to do the work of 6 and 7. The book says that I mean, the step says, step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And step 7 says, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. So I think that's all you have to do if you have an intervening God. But if you don't, then I'm providing an alternative, or at least describing what I've done. And so people in my line who do not have a God, and the people I sponsor, if they believe in an intervening God, they don't do this work. But if they don't, then the work they do is to identify all their character defects. And we go over the list to make sure that there aren't duplicates, like vengeful, punishing, and vindictive are probably one character defect, not 3. And then they define those character defects and they identify the opposite. And then we go over that list to make sure that they are 12-step appropriate. And what I mean by that, if you look up, if manipulative is one of my character defects, to manipulate others, and I look up in an antonym dictionary, it may say that the opposite of manipulation is stationary. I can manipulate this pen in space, or I can hold it stationary, hold it still. So we want to make sure that we choose opposites that are meaningful for this 12-step work that we do. And then there's a set of questions. And you know, sometimes alcoholics want to be the worst, the best at being the worst. And so I've had people come up with 174 defects of character, and nobody has 174 defects of character, but they had a lot of duplicates on there, and they had a lot of feelings that they were calling defects, but they're not. They're feelings. They weren't behaviors. So the first question on the worksheet is, give me 2 recent examples of this defect in your life. And they do. Let's say they do. If they can't, then it comes off the list. Then the questions are, how does this defect harm you and block you from recovery? And the next question is, how does it harm others and block connection and intimacy? And then the next question is, are you willing to have God remove this defect of character by you replacing it with its opposite? And if not, what are you gaining by holding on to it? And that's a really important question. You know, it's okay if you're not ready to let that defect go. Maybe the defect is unforgiving and you're just still so wounded that you're not willing to let go of being unforgiving. It will eventually beat you into a state of willingness. Any of our defects will, if we hold on to them long enough. And the longer we're sober, the harder it becomes. The harder it becomes to hold on to a defect. But in the beginning, it may be that we hold on to it. And then we go over the answers to those questions, and then we take a set of 3x5 index cards. And on the front goes the defect, and on the back goes the asset, the opposite. Harsh, gentle, stingy, generous, rigid, flexible, unforgiving, forgiving, whatever they might be. And then one card gets pulled a day. You pull one card in the morning, you read it out loud, because when we do that, it's spoken, it's seen, and it's heard. It'll stick with, for me, it sticks with me better than if I simply look at it and read it. And I turn the card over and I do the same with the opposite side. And then as I go through my day, I watch for that character defect coming up, and when it does, I replace it with its opposite. And for me, that's a very powerful way. So when I work with people, they go through that full deck of character defects twice. And then we sit down and have a conversation, and the conversation is about whether they feel they have changed sufficiently that they can move forward into 8 and 9 and go and look people dead in the eye as changed individuals. And that's the key. Have they amended their behavior? Because when we go out to make amends, like I said, when I went out to make amends, people didn't want to hear that I was sorry again. But they looked me in the eye and they listened to me, and they could hear in my voice, they could see in my eye that I was different. That there was a genuine humility and caring and integrity and honor and compassion and responsibility that had simply not existed previously. I stood naked, I stood vulnerable, I stood accountable, I stood ready to take responsibility, because I would ask, of course, not just identify how I wronged them, but of course asking, is there any other ways I've harmed you, and what can I do to set this right? And they could tell that I stood ready to do whatever it was that needed to be done to make it right. And it's so incredible to have that experience and be able to look people dead in the eye, not be looking at their chin or their nose or their forehead, but dead in the eye, and really from a place of humility and absolute certainty that I need to do the work to fit myself to better be of service to God and my fellows, and I've not had, I know some people have, I've not had amends where people go, fuck you, get out of here, I don't want to ever see you again. I've just not had those. And I'm so grateful for that. This is such important work. And if you're of my background, like I said earlier, if you have a God that's an intervening God who will, if you come in genuine humility and ask him to remove your defects, that you believe he will remove them, then you don't need to do all this work that I'm talking about. I'm really speaking to those that don't. And it is kind of revolutionary I was very nervous the first time I kind of started talking about this idea of character defects being behaviors, not feelings, because that's what I grew up hearing, it was our feelings that were the problem, and it just wasn't. It was my behavior. I was also told early on, there are 3 locomotives: thoughts, feelings, and action. And if you're a real alcoholic, a real cocaine addict, then you better hook your butt to the one called action, because that one will go straight down the track and it will haul your feelings and your thoughts into line behind it. But if you're hooked to the locomotive of thoughts or feelings, you're in big trouble, because our brains are my brain, let me change that. My brain is just a little bit broken. It comes up with the most convoluted justifications to do whatever the thing is that isn't a recovery-based behavior. It just will convince me that, no, this is a good idea, and you can do this. And then suddenly, man, there I am, just back in trouble or running on momentum. And, those first 6 months of my sobriety were horrendous because I was still engaging in behaviors that were so, I don't know how to do this without talking. I was said I wasn't going to talk about the traditions, but some of I love the 12 traditions and talk about them. I do a workshop on applying the traditions to relationships. And that seventh tradition filter that we talk about, the seventh tradition being the money, the self-supporting. And it's not that it's not, but it's so much more. And my wife and I, who created the workshop on applying the traditions to relationships, developed a filter for that seventh tradition. And it's just, is what I'm about to say or what I'm about to do self-sabotaging or self-supporting? And again, I don't know how you all got here, but I got here sabotaging every single arena of my life. My finances came in $130,000 in credit card debt from playing the big shot and, going to restaurants that were beyond our means and ordering only call brands of liquor and running to the ATM to get more cocaine. And we were in so much debt, and my health, my joy, my spirituality, my marriage. I mean, Nancy and I both, she was as much a cocaine addict and alcoholic as I was, maybe more. The first time I heard her speak at a meeting, she talked about stealing my cocaine. I was a dealer, stealing my cocaine and helping me look for it. And I thought that was like a joke. I didn't know it was a real thing. And it turns out it was my wife who was doing it. Jay, calm down. Let's be methodical. We'll find it. She had stolen it, so, and just both of us doing sexual stuff that was outrageous and so corrosive to real intimacy and to the honor of our marriage, and I just never know who it's going to help. So I'll tell you, what I learned. What I learned at age 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, and then again in the penitentiary when I was being gang raped repeatedly, was that what I learned was that my only worth and value were to stick a dick in. And so I was going out and engaging in behaviors to validate that lie. I didn't know it was a lie. And the shame and the secrecy that surrounded that fed one another. There was so much shame, and so I became very secretive. And the more I held those secrets, the bigger the shame got. And I couldn't stop. And the big book talks about the cycle of spree and remorse. And for me, it wasn't even a cycle. It was a spiral of spree and remorse, engaging in those pitifully and incomprehensibly demoralizing behaviors and being so filled with shame. I would go home and Nancy would look at me with a look of love in her eye, and I'd start a fight so I could push her away. And to myself, I'd say, what is wrong with this woman that she would love a piece of shit like me? And then I'd get loaded, and once I was loaded, I'd go back and act out sexually, and couldn't stop it, and got sober and continued to do those behaviors because there was so much self-hate. I just wanted to give myself away. I didn't want me. I wanted to give me away. And so I gave it to those that would most readily accept it and abuse it and exploit it. And that was men in the gay baths. And it just about killed me. It brought me right to suicide's door, And then one day at 6 months sober, I was in that situation, and suddenly my wife and my sponsor just appeared, one on each shoulder, and whispered in my ears, "Honey, we love you. You don't need to do this anymore." And I pulled away from the two guys that were doing me and took a shower, got dressed, and walked out, and I've never been back. And on December 2nd, I'll be 37 years sober. So it's been a long time, but those kinds of behaviors, that's what I'm talking about when I say self-sabotaging. And I didn't know I was being driven by my feelings, and I couldn't change my feelings. So how do I stop the behavior? If the behavior is driven by my feelings and I can't change my feelings, then I'm kind of doomed to stay in that behavior forever. And what I didn't know is that I could change the behavior, that's what steps 6 and 7 were about. Finding replacements, the opposite of what behavior, replacing being self-sabotaging with being self-supporting. Replacing behaving dishonorably with behaving honorably. Replacing my hate, whether it was for you or for me, with compassion. Taking a really close look at what I had lost. As a child, I lost my sanity and my safety and my security and my innocence and my trust and any sense that I could say no and have it be heard, let alone respected. I couldn't heal that stuff until I could identify what I lost. Then I could heal the losses. And as I developed compassion and became broader, and I was told that compassion is kind of like pregnancy. You are or you aren't. Having compassion for you and hate, and hate for me is not a compassionate stance. You either are or you aren't. And so I looked at my rapists, my perpetrators, and it was a man of the house and his father and his 16-year-old son, 3 generations of men in the same family that I had been given to. And I as a health and mental health expert, professional, not expert, I understand that not all victims become perpetrators, but that almost all perpetrators have been victims. And I looked at this family, that was a grandfather, a father, and a son, 3 generations, and I have to believe that before I came on the scene, that son was probably being done by his father and grandfather. And before he was on the scene, the father was probably being done by the grandfather and whomever else. And it was generational abuse, generational incest, and there's no excuse for it. But I could certainly understand it. And I could reach for compassion for their suffering. And I did the work of, certainly got sober and then did work with a therapist and then did Tonglen, Tonglen. It's a Tibetan Buddhist practice, either meditative or on the spot practice. And it's generalizing, but if most meditative techniques are about breathing in the good, the God, and the light, and breathing out the darkness and the fear and the rage, then Tonglen is the opposite, where you breathe in the suffering and you breathe out the antithesis of that suffering. And so that's what I did. And you start with yourself, and I would breathe in my terror and my trauma and my self-hate, and breathe out spaciousness and grace and honor and compassion. And then I extended it to any child anywhere on the planet who on this day is being abused in the way I was, or being abused in any way. And then I extended it to anyone who has ever had that experience. And I found that I was breathing out the love and the spaciousness and the compassion for my abusers, because I believed that they were victims at one time as well. And in doing that, I healed. And I never had to go back to the gay baths. So there's a lot of work that we get to do here, because the payoff is so huge. You read those 5th step promises, you read the 9th step promises, the 10th step promises, we get to live happy, joyous, and free. We get to live lives based in dignity and compassion and service and honor, and that's all I ever wanted. I talk about it when I talk about the 3rd tradition, I talk about it calling us to surrender being conditional, not like I'll be loving and kind as long as my wife does what I want, when I want, in the bedroom, or we see the movie I want to see, or we eat where I want, that I want to be unconditional, unconditionally honorable and honoring and passionate and compassionate and consistent and curious and courageous. And, those are the kinds of qualities that when I live those, I'm attractive to me and to others. And that 11th tradition filter, the 11th tradition's the one that talks about public relations policy based on attraction rather than promotion. And our filter for that just says, as my loving God stands at my side, would that God find what I'm about to say or what I'm about to do to be attractive? And if I don't believe that a loving God would find my words or my actions attractive, I don't do them. But I didn't know how to not do them until I did the work of 6 and 7. That's what let me change my behavior. And the behavior was the locomotive that went straight down the tracks and pulled my feelings and my thinking, my feelings and my thoughts into line behind it. And I guess for those people who don't need a program like we do, the normies, as we call them, they don't have to lead with behavior. They can get their heads straight, and kind of just then their behavior falls into line. That doesn't work for me. And my understanding is it doesn't work for us, that we act ourselves into healthy and proper thinking. We don't think our way into healthy action. So I'm grateful that I was told that. I'm grateful that I've really approached this with reverence for our book, but an understanding that it is meant to be suggestive only, and that I could look at character defects as problems with my behavior and realize that I get to choose my behaviors. I don't get to choose my feelings. And my behavior is changed. I am unrecognizable from the person who walked into these rooms. And And I think that's all I've got to say. I mean, I hope somebody got something out of this. I'm just so honored to be here, share with y'all. My name is Jay Westbrook. I'm an alcoholic in Tupelo, Mississippi. I love y'all, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for your share. You were heard. We appreciate you and are grateful that you're here. Let's all take a moment, please. My Creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out here to do your bidding. Amen. And I'd now like to hand the meeting back to Jay. If you could take us out with a prayer or reading of your choice, please, Jay.
Sure. Let me read from the end of the story of the woman who brought Alcoholics Anonymous to Chicago. And she says, it's on page 276 in the big book. The last 15 years of my life have been rich and meaningful. I have had my share of problems, heartaches, and disappointments because that is life. But also I have known a great deal of joy and a peace that is the handmaiden of an inner freedom. I have a wealth of friends, and with my CA friends, an unusual quality of fellowship. For to these people I am truly related, first through mutual pain and despair, and later through mutual objectives and newfound faith and hope. And as the years go by, working together, sharing our experiences with one another, and also sharing a mutual trust, understanding, and love, without strings, without obligation, we acquire relationships that are unique and priceless. There is no more aloneness. With that awful ache so deep in the heart of every alcoholic that nothing before could ever reach it, that ache is gone and never need return again. Now, there is a sense of belonging, of being wanted and needed and loved. In return for a bottle and a hangover, we have been given the keys of the kingdom.